discussion today is, of course, you've already been introduced to Brian Schneider, partner at Eric Fox, and counsel for the right MLS, far right. And then I've got Esther, I'll go on order here. Jason Sherman, who is the CEO of RLAH. I have Shannon McGhan here with us today, who is the, I guess, what is it? You're with the NAR. Are you?
Yes.
Would you consider yourself a lobbyist for the NAR?
I am a registered lobbyist. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer, so I oversee all of our advocacy efforts.
No shoe throwing here today. All right? All right. And I have Esther Camarotte. Is that correct?
That is.
Thank you. And Esther is principal broker for EXP. So I wanted to, get some perspective from a broker's perspective today, obviously perspective from the NAR and so forth. So I'm going to start this out. We're going to have a discussion just on specific. I have specific questions here, as you can see in my hand. They are in the hot seat somewhat today. But I'm going to start out by reading a quote from you guys have seen this out there, whether it's consumer advocacy groups, like the Consumer Federation of America or CARE, even, Michael, is it Michael Ketchum? Ketchmark, excuse me, Michael Ketchmark from who is the lead plaintiff's attorney in the NAR case, who was interviewed recently and sounded like a rabid dog, but was, seemed hell-bent on monitoring your every move out there.
He needs another yacht, I think is what he's going
Oh, he's short a yacht?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I want to read this to you. This just was posted yesterday by one of the consumer advocates. And I'm going to read it, and I want to get the reaction from all four of you. Okay? So I'm going to read it. What's so hard to understand? Any offer to compensate the buyer for their use of a real estate agent or concession to cover that compensation made outside of a legal binding offer to purchase is diametrically opposed to the wishes of the Department of Justice. See the DOJ statement of interest in the Nosali case. That's the Massachusetts case. That filing could not have been more clear. The DOJ is opposed to any protocol that facilitates the seller exerting any influence on the buyer's decision whether to use an agent or how much to pay that agent. A seller offering such compensation prior to being asked to compensate is irrational behavior. Unless, of course, it's part of a conspiracy to inflate real estate commissions beyond the level that would be found in a freely competitive marketplace. Realtors just don't do it. Brian, what's your reaction to that?
Can you hear me? Are we good? Not good on sound?
Oh.
Sound, guys? Here.
As a lawyer, I cannot imagine a situation where I would say to a client, you won't pay me anything, but if we win, the other side will pay me 30%.
So the question is, what's so hard to understand? I think what he doesn't understand, one, we don't believe he's going to enforce what he's doing. That's an industry-wide kind of issue. We have long said, right, as agents, brokers, we'll police ourselves, we'll do a good job, leave us alone, and that's essentially kind of worked for us. And so I think there is, maybe not in this room, but I think there is a mindset within the industry of, I'll believe it when I see it. And there's somebody like lightning striking, I'm not at the top, I'm a little below somebody else, so they'll get hit, I'll be fine. And he's saying, I just won a $5 billion lawsuit and I'm dating the DOJ. We're in bed together. Don't you see how serious this is? And so I think those two irreconcilable forces are headed for a collision. And either they will figure out how to enforce us in a way that gets us in line, speaking generally, or they won't, and things will get really wild the other way. So I think that's kind of what's going on right now.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. And Shannon, I know this is a little maybe legalistic perhaps, but could you speak just from the NAR's perspective on this?
Sure. I don't know if my mic is working,
Well,
or we
I
can
think
just.
hold this up here. I think it's, if you just hold it around here.
We got it going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so I'm not a lawyer, don't play one on TV, but I work with our team of lawyers and about 60 advocacy professionals in DC. And what I would point to is that we have 40 states that through law implicitly or explicitly support the current broker commission model, and an entire federal housing finance system that not just supports that model, but came out in writing post-settlement in March and said, yes, that the current way that the commissions are handled can still be handled. This is customary, was the term that they used. And then we were able to also go to the Department of Veterans Affairs and through our some oversight with Congress to confirm that the VA would stand down from their misguided guidebook that would not allow for the buyer to finance their own use of a real estate agent. So all of those are coming from the federal government, and when we do get these types of questions, what the advocacy team points to is that there would have to be massive changes from FHFA, the GSEs, FHA, HUD, others on all of these programs, and the conversations that we're having with those regulators and more importantly with the lawmakers who actually would have to do this work are in agreement that the current system is working, and it's working very well for buyers and sellers.
Esther?
I'm going to go with, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're just,
We'll just do the one mic approach.
I guess we're just trading mics. No sound.
The question is, can it be understood? Yes, it can be understood, but I think we're going to go back to sort of VA buyers. And I've been doing this for over 30 years. The largest pool of buyers has always been first-time buyers. And I think the impact to the low income, the first-time buyer, is the hardest. And in this country, a lot of us have built our wealth on real estate. And I think that's going to hurt a lot of those people who want to buy homes and now are going to be restricted by these regulations.
Yeah, I think that's right. We'll get into some more, get into specifics now, but Esther, I'm going to pass the microphone back to you. I want to, I'm sorry we're having to pass it back and forth. We have some bad technical issues today. But a question for you on these, we're going to get into the buyer brokerage agreements. Buyer brokerage agreement is amendable, right? The question is, what is the requirement? Before sales ratification, before sales contract ratification, or before settlement? If before settlement, what stops a buyer agent from just putting zero compensation and just amending prior to settlement? Then the point of all this, what am I getting? I'm getting different answers, I guess, is what I'm saying. I'm getting different answers from state realtor associations. So can you comment on that for us?
So we don't have clarity. We are supposed to have a buyer agency prior to walking into a property before we can show it. We have buyers we have agents who have put zero and have forgotten, they didn't know that class, whatever. And then they come to us as brokers and they say, hey, compliance catches it. And now they're going back to their buyer, adjusting their buyer, because we've called the State Association Legal Hotline, and they've said, just amend it. Before settlement? Then why isn't anyone just putting zero? Because the buyers are freaking out that they have to pay something. And we'll go to that veteran buyer, because we see we are in the middle, we have Quantico, we have a lot of veterans even up here, right, who don't have that money. So if we put just a fee of $500, do we amend this prior to writing the offer? Because if we're negotiating if we're asking the listing agent before we show property what the commission is, we're then negotiating our commissions prior to showing the property, which I would think is a violation, correct? All right, so when are we, so if you now if we now show the property and we find out in the negotiations that yes, that seller is willing to pay our buyer agent 2.5, whatever it is, are we amending this prior to ratification, or can that agent amend it prior to actual settlement?
I'll answer that.
I'm going to pass the microphone to you.
No, there are actually, I think, very clear answers to that. The answer is, this is a contract. You can negotiate it when you want. If your client has agreed to pay 0 and they don't want to renegotiate that, good luck. I mean, that's the problem, folks. If you sign a contract that says you pay 0, and it ends up not being that, or it ends up that, hey, the other side has offered to pay something to me, please agree. Why would your buyer client say, sure, take it? The buyer client's going to say, no, I want that in my deal. I want it. We can split it. I'll take 90%, you take 10%, but you agreed 0 was the number. So that's the problem with taking that approach.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Jason, do you have any comments on that?
Sure,
I'm going to give it to you.
I'm going to take it.
Because, yeah.
You invited me here to talk,
Yes,
so
I
I'm going to
did.
find something to talk
Yes, I
about.
did.
I think the way we look at it as a brokerage is, first, NAR and the plaintiff's attorney aren't even, I would argue, in total agreement on what they've signed. So by the time it filters down to us, there is a slight guessing game that's going on. But I think as agents and brokers, we want to prioritize our legal risk. And so, for example, to twist the question a little bit, these touring agreements, right? These touring agreements that don't meet the standard of the settlement agreement, they don't have the proper disclosures, they don't discuss money, what do you do? And so, or when do you have an agreement signed? And so an agent came to me and said, look, I'm going to use the lightest agreement humanly possible because I'm going to go out with this person that I met for 6 seconds. We're going to look at some homes. No big deal. The point is they're going to fall in love with me, and then I'm going to sit down with them, and we're going to sign this real buyer agency agreement. And I said, that sounds great. Can I twist that story a little bit? How about while you're out showing them homes, they surprise you, and they say, I love this place. Let's draft an offer right now. And you look at this flimsy agreement you have and you say, oh wait, no, let's sign the real agreement, let's plug in the money, wait, I might have already heard from the seller what's being offered, and we'll package it all together with the offer and we'll be great. I think that fact pattern gets you more than $5 billion the next time around, right? The fact pattern was there wasn't disclosures in the first settlement agreement, people didn't really understand what was going on, they didn't know how people were getting paid, and now you're doubly rushing the issue. So the way we're looking at in our brokerage is, first you have to understand the rules as best you can, and then there's creativity layered upon that. So if you want to give somebody the full agreement before touring and zero out the money and make it for a day and make it for a property, by all means go do that. There's some risk to you that maybe they'll like the house and you won't get paid, or maybe you'll have a chance to mutually agree and change that agreement prior to offer submission. But you want to get as much as you can across to the buyer up front that's consumer friendly, which was the purpose of the settlement agreement to begin with, and then limit it perhaps to time and money and other factors. But I say play within the rules as best you can, but create flexibility where you need to, and then make sure the client understands that you're not doing this for you. In fact, it's horrible. I mean, it's for them. It's for them. The whole agreement was for them. So I think if you pose it to them with that in mind, they're going to favor you over somebody who is using a small paragraph that doesn't meet any of the settlement agreement requirements.
Yeah. Great, yeah. I'm going to start back here, and I'm not skipping you just yet. Don't think you're not getting off. But Esther, another question I have, and I'm going to pass it again, like same order back to Brian and then Jason. But with respect to open houses, this is something that's come up here recently. You know, when a property is being held open and the host of the open house is an agent, but not the listing agent, the hosting agent's intent is to pick up buyers. What needs to be disclosed? Does something need to be signed by the prospective buyer since the listing agent is not the person holding the open? What happens to those buyers who already have a buyer brokerage agreement with their agent? I'm going to you.
So this comes up, you have listing agents you have agents who are just listers, right? They don't want to deal with the buyers. And they have a buyer's agent that some states are great because state of Maryland, you're required to put a disclosure up on who represents what. But that's not the case in Virginia or DC. So is that buyer, we're talking about full disclosure, right? We're consumer disclosure. That buyer coming in typically thinks the person holding the open is the listing agent. Because you're going to get a lot of that now. You're going to get a lot of people who are going to want to skip over that buyer. So we would think that at least the minimum is allowed. You know, not the heavy-duty buyer agency walking through because no one's who's doing an open house. But we would think that something needs to be signed coming in, okay? That they understand, I'm not the listing agent. I'm the buyer agent. Because the buyer's intent, what was explained to us is, what's the intent of the agent standing there, right? The intent of the agent standing at that open house is not necessarily to sell the house, but to pick up buyers.
Right.
So we would want them to sign something.
Right. Brian, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a gray area, right? Because the agent is actually working with the same broker as the listing broker, and that's all that matters. And so if you're there, you are there representing the listing broker until you also become a dual agent. And so I think under the strict terms of the settlement agreement, until you are showing the person the home on their behalf and not on behalf of the seller, you probably don't need a contract. But as soon as you tell the person, I will show you the house for you, not for the seller, or I will be your due agent, I will be your agent, I don't represent the seller, or I'm working with the broker, but I can be separate and help you. I think once you make that representation, I'm going to work with you, buyer, then you need to have a contract. And I think you're taking a good conservative view because I think it's a gray area.
Yeah. Jason.
Yeah, I guess the position, and we might stand corrected at some point, is that when buyers come into an open house, our position is that you're not obligated to sign anything. You might check in, sign in, but I don't think that the person holding the open house, whether it be the listing agent or someone else at the brokerage, is really doing any real work on behalf of potential buyers that come through. If they turn into an unrepresented buyer, that's a whole new category. But just coming through an open house. Also, you don't want that friction in place when they're coming in looking. I think it works against the seller if a buyer has to come in and sign these documents from people they don't know, don't have a relationship with, prior to looking around. I think it could actually add some friction to the sale, so we're not enforcing it.
Go ahead.
Are we taking questions yet?
Go ahead. Just go ahead.
So, respectfully to all of you, the esteemed people we have on the dais, what I'm hearing right now is that I hear a totally different answer from legal than I do from brokers. We're hearing this in our industry with our own brokers. Everybody has a different interpretation of what we can and can't do.
Right.
I would say to the representative from NAR, the minutia is fun, but what I question, and I think a lot of agents I'm talking to are questioning, we all thought that the GCAR and the NAR and all of these people that we were members of were representing our interests as agents. This whole situation has made us understand that may not be the case. Do we need a union like AFL-CIO to actually protect us legally, because nobody is now protecting us legally in a very litigious situation? This lawsuit seems to be just the beginning of how this is coming down the pike to us. And I'd love for the staff to address this, because I don't hear any sort of obvious agreement on how
Right.
this is even working.
Yeah, and I mentioned that, Kelly, in my opening remark, because as I mentioned, I've talked to dozens and dozens of agents, of course, over the last 6 months or so, who feel that same frustration that we're not getting answers, right? But I don't know if there are answers right now. And that's why we're here today, to sort through it. As far as NAR, I'll let Shannon speak to that. I mean, and I'm not here to defend anybody. I'm just here as a moderator right now. But I mean, NAR, has taken some significant steps here over the past few weeks, including the consumer guide and so forth, and trying to get things tidied up. But Shannon, I'll let you speak to that.
Please, and thank you. That's a great question. And again, I am not an attorney, but I would ask all of you to please pull out your phone and go to facts.realtor, where we have all of the resources that are available post-settlement. And just did an hour-long phone call with our team earlier today to go over some of the rollout of this information, 6 months of material there. We just put out the VA home buying guide that has all of the latest guidance there. And if you do see that there are these types of questions that are not addressed, then we can take that information, and we have our internal legal team, external counsels. We're speaking with other external counsels throughout the industry to make sure that these types of answers are being met, and that they are going out in a public way that is designed both for consumers, for agents, for brokers, and for the entire real estate community. So it's on facts.realtor.
Yeah.
I have something to say.
Me too.
Shannon, or Esther, excuse me.
So I think what you have to remember is that there are maybe 75 people in this room, and we're all in different brokerages. And every brokerage is going to have its own policy. And that's what you need to follow. So they're going to follow what NAR says and what their legal counsel says. So you have to remember that whoever you're with, that is their own policy and procedure that as an agent you have to follow. So that's why you might get different answers between the two brokers.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll let you speak, but I do want you to also comment on brokerage forms and whether you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a great point you raised. And I think if you look at us all like businesses, businesses get legal advice all the time, and attorneys are going to think of it with a legal perspective. And then there is the business perspective of having to go out, run your business, make decisions. And so brokerages and agents within those brokerages are going to make slightly different decisions based on how they read the rules and they weigh the risk. Everybody's going to look at it a little bit differently. And so you're not going to see uniformity. And then, yeah, that definitely goes to the question of forms. I mean, I think in the world we live in today, right, we had this very nicely paved compensation set up where the listing agent and the MLS really preserved how a buyer agent would get paid. That's gone. Procuring cause at its best is on its deathbed, and I would say it is 6 feet under. And so what you have at the end of the day, from a business standpoint, all things aside, how do you ensure when you don't choose to, when you don't want to work for free, when you do think you've worked hard, when you do think you deserve to get paid at the end of the day? How do you ensure that happens? Well, your agreement with your client is what protects that. And yes, buyer agent compensation is being put into the contract, but sellers and buyers can mutually agree to change the contract at any time. And so hopefully that doesn't happen too often, but on the rare occasion that it does, what do? You look back to your form. And I think that is where the broker-agent relationship, what does that agreement look like? How are the parties being held together becomes really important. And I think it does send a signal to the client. I mean, if I went to Brian for a will and he says, let me just print one off the American Bar Association website, I might go to a different attorney. And so I think the fact that you, to Brian's earlier point, that you have put time and thought and you understand what you're asking people to sign and you understand the parameters of it is going to be important going forward. I think you will see brokerages on whole draft their own buyer agency agreement, draft their own listing agreement, and in some way you can look at those forms, how they've been drafted for you as a love letter to you about how they're going to protect you going forward. Because I'll leave it there, but those deals individually to you are very important, and you should know going in how protected your arrangement is with your client. And if you want it to be enormously flexible, that's fine, but if you want it to have some teeth, you should also have that ability.
Yeah, I love the sort of the pugilistic sort of framing of your question. I appreciate it before and now as well. I think I hear two permutations to what you're asking. The first is I think what you're getting at, which is help me understand what I'm supposed to do, because I just want to know how to do the right thing. And if everything's gray, I don't know what to do. Like, I just want to carry on my business. That is a really fair question, and I think you deserve good, clear answers to the extent people can give it to you. And because the answers are now muddier than they were, it's harder to give you good, clear answers. And if you're not getting them, try asking more people, because I feel like I can give pretty good, clear answers, and I know there's a lot of people who can. I think the second piece, though, of what could be heard from your question, and I don't think this is what you're getting at, but this is what I'm hearing others ask similar questions, is why can't we just try to do what we did before? Why isn't NAR or other groups doing more to keep our compensation up? And that's what the plaintiff's lawyers hear in your question. That this new system is going to attack what I get paid, and now I'm making less. And the plaintiff's lawyers hear that and say, thank you. So as you think about your framing and your business decisions, bear their perspective in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that.
Actually, I want to respond to that. I had no way thinking about compensation at the time I asked that. I just wonder, do I have any fiduciary in any one of my memberships? I don't think I do.
Well, so, okay, if you're getting at like your sort of union example, remember unions are for employees. A whole different ball of wax, right, in terms of that. There's a reason why trade associations exist. I mean, most of my practice with trade associations is to help industries solve problems collectively. I mean, and whether you agree with what NAR has done or not, that is NAR's role. I don't know that there's a better trade association in the country for that. Like I said earlier, the fact that they got you all released from claims that either were or weren't yet asserted against you, pretty darn good. I think you've got to keep that in mind. If you don't like the solution, you got to think about what it is that you're really critiquing, and I think that's my concern.
Excuse me. I just had a question to go back about the initial buyer agency agreement under the new regs. Okay, so you remember 2 weeks ago when we had the old buyer agency, new agents were always counseled, please don't, make sure you don't put 0 in there, right, for your comp, right? Because it's 6% or 5% or whatever, and you'll get paid. And then if you go to contract, you could end up with 0. So what I hear the brokers saying is, when you sign under the new program, put in 0 or 500, and remember we're told we don't work for nothing, and then you develop a rapport and we can adjust that. And I have real problems with that. Up front, I think you should advocate for whatever you think you're worth, rather than getting into a potential problem later on, as you were saying, Brian, where now I like the house and, oh no, you put 0 or 500. You know, I hope I can give you 10%, but we'll see, you know, what's on the other end, so.
Right. Jason, you want to comment on that?
I totally agree with you. Sorry, if the way I answered the question made you think that I was encouraging 0 or 500, I'm not. What's coming up sometimes from some agents who are used to getting leads from portals or other places, and they've met someone for 6 seconds, they go, how do I put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 35, whatever. And so agents are having to make decisions. I agree that you should state your value, your compensation from the start and move forward. But if an agent is not comfortable doing that, which I'm not advocating, but if they're in that position and they have to make a hard choice, make the hard choice to limit the time and the compensation, but don't abandon the form with all of the disclosures and information in it. That was my only point.
I'm
Jeff.
a buyer's agent, and what I have done is taken pre-printed G-card forms and put all my information in, and I put 3%, because my understanding through my broker is that if I put in 2.5 and the seller's offering 3, I can't take the other half. So I start at 3. When I'm meeting buyers, let's say before we walk into the house, I have it pre-printed with all mine. I write the property address in, I put their name, I make them sign it. It says 3% to protect my interest. I guess, you know, knowing they know then what I'm worth, and at that point I can adjust downward. I've also call the other agent while I'm at the house to see what they're offering. I mean, I've done it prior, but I've been doing it in front of my clients, calling the agent, hoping I get hold of them and hear them say we're offering 2.5%. So I've been doing it live with every buyer that I've been showing.
It's a great example.
Excuse me. You know, we're a number of brokers in this meeting, and you can't discuss percentages at all. We're going to be in fair labor, trouble with the Justice Department just for discussing percentages.
Yeah.
We are not allowed to set
Yeah, let's not.
percentages at all or discuss it.
Yeah,
So please refrain from doing that.
yeah, good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Todd, I want to make a point, just quickly.
Kat-
So, in the panel, we don't have anyone representing contracts, creating the language for the contract. We're mired in this problem we're having, but we're not going above that. We have cured possibly when a buyer changes the loan type. We worry that the seller's bottom line will change. So when you make changes in the money side, you must also look at the bottom line for the seller. So in this panel, we don't have somebody addressing the contract. We can solve some problem based on the language we put into our contract, so that we're not getting zero commission and we're never going to get any commission because now we've changed our mind. We should be protected in the contract that if we need to be able to negotiate and the seller is willing to pay us the commission, let's do it as long as it doesn't change somebody's bottom line too drastically, right? It is still a contract, it's negotiable.
Well, I guess first, I've heard from you and you that, yes, you can mutually agree to change a contract at any point along the way. From a broker standpoint, I think, having lived from the broker end of things and seeing some messes over time, almost anyone can make an argument. And once that argument is made and you have an unhappy client and they have an attorney, you're spending money whether you're right or wrong. And so you are living your life in a bit of a microscope, and you're trying to create fact patterns that benefit you rather than hurt you. So if you are constantly renegotiating your commission up or down along the way, and that becomes a focus of an attorney of a former client of yours, I think you say to yourself, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And so again, where you start off with the rules and then creativity builds, I think, first, there's a reason why I think the DOJ wants you to negotiate as a buyer agent with your buyer first, because that's harder. It's harder to negotiate a fee with your buyer, and then it's easier to negotiate it with the sellers. They want to get it capped there where you are at your weakest. And so if you are constantly creating a negotiation with your buyer that allows you then to renegotiate it and alter it with the seller, forget the DOJ, right? The chances of them coming after you specifically are a little low. But those local attorneys, I was saying before the meeting, you saw the yacht party stuff. We heard from Mr. Ehrlich. I don't think he was joking up here when he said, I told you all this, so now you're all reckless. I think they see +2 in the polls when they go after realtors. And local attorneys who make a few $100s off a DUI see a few $1,000s or more off a realtor, and they see an opportunity. So you're constantly creating fact patterns for yourself that will either make it harder or easier for you to protect your finances. And there's nothing that stops an agent from getting sued. So I think the best thing that an agent can do is play it as straight as possible. And part of that is building up the muscle of being able to negotiate with a buyer and get your fee.
Right. Yeah, I think those who are the most skilled advocates for their buyers are going to prevail in all this. And this all goes to fiduciary. What your question, this all goes to really fiduciary duties. And I think there's from my discussions with folks and so forth, there's still a large gap out there in understanding fiduciary duties. I spoke with Brian, before this meeting today about that, and the NAR, to their credit, is getting focused on fiduciary duties, and they just released. I don't know if you saw this release. Was it late last week on the consumer guide? right? The consumer guide, realtors' duty to put clients' interest above their own. And I think the more agents follow and abide by fiduciary duties, the better off they're going to be. I mean, this guide that they put out, goes so far as to say, this is to a consumer. What can I do if I think a realtor is violating NAR's code of ethics? And it explains to them. This is good for the industry. I know it sounds harsh. It sounds like it's a threat, but this is good for the industry. And I'm going to let Shannon speak to this and what the NAR is doing.
Sure, absolutely. So first off, we don't set the fiduciary duty. That is done at the state level and state-by-state basis, but through the Code of Ethics is enforceable through NAR. And when it comes to the work that we're doing with consumers, this is happening day in and day out. So in addition to the 1.5 million members who we're representing and talking to each day, we have a 10 million member American Property Owners Alliance. That is a consumer-facing organization that works directly on surveys, focus groups, messaging with consumers on what is it that they are looking for as part of the transaction. And I would love it if you guys can go to their website, sign up and get those email alerts, but this is also an important advocacy tool because APOA is able to directly reach out to these consumers and let them know about issues that are facing them. One other issue I want to bring up, since, sir, you mentioned you had very valid questions and points on what is the value that you are seeing with this NAR membership. If it's not going to mitigate legal risk, where are other areas of interest? And you mentioned potentially unionizing. That is one existential issue that we have been facing over several Congresses, and especially this year, is the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize, that could potentially strip independent contractor status of the 90% of the independent contractors that we have in our membership who we have surveyed and talked to who choose to be independent contractors. It is by design. And we've seen Department of Labor issue new rulemaking that creates, to Brian's point, a gray area in what that independent contractor status looks like. And so this is something that our advocacy team has been working on, not just at NAR, but through the states, especially California and New Jersey, where you see these issues pop up a lot. And so those are the types of things that aren't always in the news. They are not always getting a lot of attention, but are incredibly important to how you all do your business and to how our membership does our business and to how consumers are able to have access to these services. So if you do have the time and ability, we have plenty of resources on that. We have an Advocacy Scoop podcast. I have to do a podcast once a month. I won't listen to it. Please listen to it so I don't have to. But we go through all of these issues. We know you don't have time to go to our website, search through all of these issues and know what we're doing day in and day out. Just yesterday, we had Dr. Lawrence Yoon and some of our members go to the White House and meet with their top economic team to share with them market conditions that are impacting the state of real estate, and in particular, the record low lack of inventory, high inflation, high interest rates that's leading to incredibly high housing prices, and their misguided efforts to look at real estate practices or others that may be potentially doing that when it's public policy that is creating these issues. So these are all things that we communicate, and if we can do a better job of getting it directly to you, or if you have suggestions there, I'm all ears, but I do this podcast, even though I don't want to do the podcast all the time, just so we have the ability to get to you in your car while you're on the road and you don't have to go searching through our website. All of you, if you are members of NAR, should be getting a monthly email that's called the Realtor Party News Alerts. It's a newsletter, and that includes all of this information as well. The open rate's pretty high, but then I talk to folks and they don't seem to know what's in there. So I don't know what is the best way of getting that information out there. But we hear you. We know that communication is a challenge, and we're trying every avenue possible, and I'm all ears for more.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this was touched upon earlier by Brian, but I do think that all of us, including title companies, we all need to be viewing these changes through the eyes of the Department of Justice and the consumer advocates that are out there, these consumer advocacy groups. It's really important. I mean, if you read the statement of interest from the Department of Justice, I mean, they just pound on fiduciary duties. They pound on steering being the buzzword and so forth. So that's something I keep reminding myself of, that, you got to see it through the eyes of those folks. And on that topic of steering, Esther, I'm going to turn this over to you. My general question is, what are you seeing other brokers doing today, or what are you doing that might be creating risk?
Okay, so the question is, what am I seeing that might be creating risk? I think the biggest risk we see, I want to address her question regarding the contract. Okay, so as someone who has a lot of licenses, Northern Virginia needs to be applauded because they literally wrote in their contract the seller paying the buyer compensation. But GCAR and MAR didn't. So this becomes an issue. And so what we're seeing in some areas is, which I think is risk, which we had a discussion, is that the listing agent is broadcasting, okay? So what we see are listing agents who are trying to skirt the changes. Like, how can I skirt the changes? And that's a problem. So now there's my state MLS, right? So we've written a policy, we are not allowed, you can go in there, but you cannot disclose buyer brokerage compensation. And I think that the listing, as difficult as the buyer agent is to sit down with their buyer to negotiate their contract, which is what should be done, the listing agent now, who's been doing business the same way for 30 years, right, and now it's changed, is now trying to find, how do I skirt this? How do I get around this? How do I get my message out? And I think they're putting themselves in enormous, in a target, because, I always say, up here specifically, we live in the land of lawyers. I mean, you're going to get somebody who's not going to be happy with what you're doing and totally understands that lawsuit.
That's a good point. I think everybody's seeing, we're still seeing, emails out there offering 2.5 or whatever it is. So yes, it's still happening. Brian, I'm going to ask you to comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think even more broadly, the question to ask yourself if you're worrying about creating risk is, are you being transparent with your client that you're supposed to represent? Because that's where people are going to sue you. Either your client will or a class action will. Laying on the sword, folks are, they have office exclusives, right? And folks are complaining about the language that Bright has in one of their forms for office exclusives. You know how you're not going to get sued for having office exclusives inappropriately is by actually disclosing to your client why office exclusives are or are not good for them. So those forms are actually protecting you from getting sued, because that is on the radar of the class action plaintiffs. Are you disclosing to your clients what is in their interest? The talk about the title steering issue is exactly in that line. RESPA cases are one thing, but class action cases are where the money's at. And you could bring a class action RESPA case if you're steering clients to one firm, if you are steering clients to one mechanism of business that actually benefits the broker and not the client. So, just ask yourself, am I representing you as a client, or am I representing my business? And if I'm representing my business, have I told the client, hey, look, here's what I'm going to do. This helps me. It doesn't do anything bad to you, but here's why I do it, right? Are you having that conversation?
I think my greatest fear for realtors is that realtors are potentially not acknowledging the risk that they have. And that is really the biggest concern, because historically, whatever brokerage you were with, brokers, their in-house counsel, the E&O, it was all there for you, and you didn't really fear that you were in the line of fire. But I think the changes of today really are, I don't, whether a broker says it or not, I think every broker and every corporation realizes that now an agent is a direct line to infecting the entire brokerage. And so if someone is skirting the rules or creating a fact pattern that doesn't work, very quickly the brokerage, the in-house counsel, whomever, is going to make, I think, a cold-hearted decision, which is, am I using E&O on this agent? Am I going to bat financially for this person? Is there really an uphill battle there? Again, my concern isn't so much the DOJ, it really is the local attorneys who now see great opportunity at getting thousands of dollars from agents. To be more specifically, and I'll pass the mic, I mean, one thing that I think is a little worrisome is the marketing outside of the MLS of commissions, whether they be in emails or other places. I mean, that is encouraging steering. If I was a local attorney and I was a few bucks shy of my mortgage payment, that's a really easy one. I go, you reverse steered. You attracted people based on commission, not on the value of the property, and you pre-negotiated something away on behalf of the seller. I don't understand it. Even if the seller went for it, I feel like you must have swayed them. Again, that's an anti-realtor argument, but it's such an easy one to make. You have to say it out loud, and you have to think to yourself, do I have a good defense for that? So I just don't think agents have really settled in on the risk to themselves yet, and I think that's important.
Yeah, that's a good point. Brian, this question is for you and everybody else here, but I'll start with you, Brian. The NAR has imposed heavy restrictions and penalties for NAR members for violations on commission wording in listings, right? What, if anything, does the MLS plan to do to address remarks where listing agents try to steer other agents and their buyers to their preferred title company? We talked about this earlier today with Jeff Early.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so NAR doesn't set the rules for the MLSs do, and each MLS decides how they want to enforce their rules. But in terms of the remarks, look, the MLS now has pretty clear restrictions that around compensation, around steering related to compensation. You know, the title steering piece is not something that's been certainly on my radar and the MLS's radar. I think the new DCAG focus there that we've just learned about last week is going to shift that. I think, going with my transparency message, if you're putting in remarks, X title company preferred, why? What element is that to benefit the sale of the home to your client? And if there is one, great. If there's not, why are you putting in there other than to steer for profit that's not being disclosed? And that's just flat illegal under state law. So that would be my test all the time. I think the trouble the MLS will have in trying to enforce some restriction is it's not always illegal to have that statement. So how do we police something in a fair way where maybe there are cases where the seller says, look, I have a preferential way for your preferential firm. I will cover your title insurance if you use this firm, but if you use another firm, then it's negotiable, right? There are ways where the seller could be using that as a marketing tool. And so that's where the MLS has to sort of, how do we make a standardized rule around the right pathway then? That's hard.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll excuse you on this one, guys. But yeah, that was brought up, and that's something that that was brought up today by one of our attendees, and I hear it all the time from agents representing buyers that they're frustrated by that. So thank you, Brian, for that. One more question for the group, and then we're going to open it up for a question and answer here. And this is just a general question, but I just want to hear from all of you here, the panelists. What legal risk is still keeping you up at night for this industry?
Steering. Steering. So, there's a new case out in Utah where this, brokerage that, ostensibly was a discount brokerage of some sort, has voicemails and emails where brokers, agents are so clearly saying, you are not engaging in the business how I like it, I'm not showing you my clients your homes. I mean, if that is more broad, and I suspect that there's more out there, that's what's keeping me up at night.
I think from a practical sense, buyer agents being able to negotiate that buyer agency agreement with an appropriate fee at the start is the hardest thing we currently have to do. And it's through no fault of ours. We all succeeded under different rules just a week ago. So we are all learning a new set of rules together. What we say to our agents is, we're not encouraging it, but go ahead and make a bad deal. Don't beat yourself up. You're going to do some things that you will regret, but at the very same time, you'll learn from it. The worst mistake you can make is try to circumvent the rules. If you try to circumvent it from the beginning, be creative to make sure you get your commission later on, and then do some things that are outside of the agreement. That's really the risk. But just developing the skill set, I think, is what worries me the most. We tell everybody it's a period of chaos. You'll do some things wrong, but hang in there. You'll definitely get better at it. And there's no world where a buyer doesn't need representation. There's no world. A seller knows the house better than the buyer. They have an advocate. The buyer doesn't. That is a pretty disleveraged kind of scenario. Buyers are going to be racing back to their agents. We just have to get past kind of this unfortunate bad press.
No, I agree. I was just talking to somebody a bit ago, and from a title perspective, from our perspective, but buyers want an agent. Buyers want representation, and that's not going away. And it's up to you to, obviously it's a little harder now to advocate for a commission with the new buyer broker agreement and so forth. Not new, but convince them that there's a pathway for them to, whether it's through a seller credit or whatever. But buyers want representation. I can tell you that. Shannon.
Well, I'll take a little twist off of that. As a non-lawyer, I'm not going to share the legal risk, but I am very concerned about misguided policies, especially that could happen at the state level, that would negatively impact the ability of first-time, first-generation, or lower-income buyers to enter the market. And the benefits of the generational wealth growth and transfer and the economic security that comes with this are unmatched. We all know this. This is what we share with policymakers around the country. And while in the federal government, and Congress in particular, there's a great deal of interest in this area, we helped launch the Real Estate Caucus in May of this year with 4 members, bipartisan members, to focus in particular on how to help more people become property owners. Now they're at 49 members as of yesterday, and in August we hit all of these offices up, and I'm sure in September, once Congress is back next week, that we'll see a lot more folks joining. So I think that message is heard, but oftentimes at the state level you'll see more of these misguided policies that are being floated out there, introduced, and I think it's important for you all to know that we, when you see these quarterly filings of, the NAR is the #1 lobbying spender, or #2 this quarter, tens of millions of dollars, that funding is not all going to efforts on Capitol Hill. Roughly two-thirds of that are things that we're doing back in the States. Things like defeating a transfer tax in Chicago, rent control efforts that are popping up around the country. So there's a lot that keeps me up at night. We try to keep other people up at night. That's the more important way to do it. But helping those first-time home buyers is the most important.
What keeps me up at night? Agents who don't believe they need training. They have just gotten their license, they may be dual career, or not. That's even the more frightening part. A very experienced agent that feels they just don't need to listen from their broker. And I do want to answer the question regarding the title insurance situation that they asked. So we've all faced that as buyer's agents, where the listing agent requires, or says they prefer. I've always told my agents, write whatever they want, because the law protects your buyer. You can just ratify your contract, and then the buyer sends a notice, the buyer's agent sends a notice to the listing agent saying the buyer has now chosen XYZ title company. And that's how that problem is solved.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Esther, on that. Good point. And I think a lot of people don't understand. D.C., Maryland, Virginia all have state laws that say it is the buyer's right to choose the title company. There's also a federal law that says it is the buyer's right to choose the title company. The seller can't require it unless the seller is willing to pay the owner's title insurance, right? But they aren't. So thank you. That's a good point. All right, listen, we're going to open this up to Q&A now, unless you guys have something else you'd like to share. And if there are no questions, then we can go about our day. But here we are. There's one in the back.
Yeah, the example that you just gave even if it says in the contract that you're gonna use a specific settlement company, the buyer can still give unilateral notice
Sure.
that they're switching?
Sure,
Yep.
it's the law, yeah. Yeah. Anybody else, any other questions?
I think Shannon made a really good set of statements about the economics right now, and that's driving the market in a certain way. Buyer agents are struggling today. They're facing 10 other buyer agents on every single contract that we see. Everybody's trying to figure out how to game the system so that their contract wins. And that market's going to change. I mean, I remember markets where sellers would put a car in the driveway, a nice car, and say, this is for the buyer. Okay? So there's definitely going to be a change in this marketplace, and I think all of what we're saying about how this works is going to have to change. Because the sellers are going to be starting to give away things that are not in your buyer agency agreements. What about bonuses? I've seen $10,000, $20,000 bonuses on properties. Wasn't that long ago. Of course, for some of it is. But,
Wasn't that long ago
you
for
know,
me.
come on, guys, it's going to change. Everything in this market is not going to remain the way it is today. And you're going to have to adapt, and you're going to have to figure out how to keep in compliance with the law.
Yeah, I think,
Well, and one thing that we did clarify post-settlement is that the seller concession line, there were a lot of folks out there who said that that is going to have to change because then any of this activity will appear as a concession. And the answer is no, it doesn't have to change, because what the housing finance agencies confirmed with us in writing, and it's all on facts.realtor in the Q&A section, is that if it is the customary way that commissions have been handled, that will still continue, and that they will still treat that as commission and not in the concession. I can't speak to the historical activities of the past, but I have not heard of any of those things happening that we would have to talk to housing finance agencies about.
Well, and just to be clear, it's the customary part. The customary part of that, it's not broker to broker. The customary part of that is seller pays buyer's broker. That's the customary part, and that's how it's going to work in the future, ongoing. Good. That's key.
oh, do
Oh.
you have a, go ahead.
Well, I guess I would just add that what we're telling people is be poetic, not mathematic. So say we love buyer agents. Buyer agents are welcome. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can say that will help a buyer agent understand that you welcome them into the transaction without boxing yourself in with a number or percentage. And so there's lots of things you can say to get the point across.
Right, right. Question?
In the negotiations in DC, you were talking about the Utah example where those brokers are going to other listing brokers saying you're not doing business the way that I want you to. That sounds like, not only, it sounds like collusion as well as steering there, so, doubly bad. But in DC, we've essentially said that you can ignore the seller offers of compensation. My buyer agency agreement sets what I'm going to get paid. I'm going to negotiate either way. And so, you're just putting in the offer. It doesn't even really matter if it's on that seller broker compensation form there. That's just how much the seller is going to pay. Buyer's going to pay the same amount either way. The problem in DC, though, is that everybody knows everybody. And so, like, if you're in New York, you can put in an offer for $1 million out of the house and hurt the seller's feelings, and it doesn't matter. But in DC, you have to be a little bit more tactful. And so is it a problem to go to that listing agent and say, my buyers are choosing not to put an offer on your house because you've signaled that you don't want to negotiate on compensation with this offer that you have made so far?
I don't know how that's economically rational, so no, I don't think that's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no. Why would your buyer say, I'm not putting an offer on this house just because the other side isn't in advance telling me they'll cover X, Y, and Z costs? Put it in the offer. Put it in the offer, and then either lose the offer or win the offer. So yeah, I do think it's asking for trouble if you're telling your client, don't even put an offer on this house because they're not making a blanket offer in advance. You are asking for trouble.
Okay.
Yes, that's a great question.
You have any other questions? Okay, thank you.